it. So now we move on to the next session, which is the session 2 with Nick. We're going to hear about Paradisic, Pacific and Regional Archive for Digital Sources in Endangered Cultures. And Paradisic was a winner of the Digital Repository of Ireland Award for Research and Innovation in this year's Digital Preservation Awards in Ghent, which is very exciting. So we'll show the short video that Paradisic submitted as a finalist to the awards, and then we can talk to Nick and he can tell us a little bit more about Paradisic and what they're doing.
The aim of this project was to make recordings accessible, to digitize recordings that had been made by researchers, and then to build a community-facing resource. There was no agency taking responsibility for these recordings, so they were at risk of loss. We have a catalogue that currently represents over 1,360 languages in 230 terabytes, 16,600 hours of audio plus video, text and images. And we've moved everything to S3 storage in the last year. It's a project we did with Yap in Micronesia. You can see the tapes, and we digitized 120 tapes for them. We've also worked with the Solomon Islands National Museum and digitized many tapes, and you can see the tapes are sitting there and they're not being looked after. We go searching for tapes using our Lost and Found project, and we've, as a result, found a number of tape collections that we've been able to digitize. Now, we put everything into an online catalogue so that it's available, and more recently, what's exciting is that we've been moving everything to linked data standards using Research Object Crate. And this is the exciting and innovative work that really changes the way that the collection is described. It's described internally. Each object has its own description, which means we can take arbitrary sets of objects out of the collection and create a catalogue for just those items. So this is an example of a viewer built on top of just RO Crate. This is not running out of our catalogue. And what this allows us to do is to search within items in the collection. We aren't able to do that at the moment because we search metadata, but not the items themselves. And as you can see on the right bottom there, where there is a transcript of a media file, it can be played together with that file, and we can search those transcripts. This is really exciting and innovative. It means that we can take small arbitrary sets of material, put them onto a Raspberry Pi, which is a low-powered web server, take this out into the field, and we've done this a number of times, and provide this information together with the catalogue of just that collection. So here's an example of people in Erekor village in Vanuatu looking at material from their language on their phones that's being transmitted from a Raspberry Pi in the environment around them. We can take research recordings that were made in the past and were sitting in people's offices, and we can make them available for the source communities and be reused. It also means that the research that is done is grounded in the recordings that can be cited and reused. And we have lots of examples now of new research based on these recordings once they have licenses for reuse. This has all meant that we can collaborate with museums and archives in the Pacific that need help preserving analogue tape and have good ways of taking this back to them.
Thank you. So that's the video that was the finalist video. So now I'd just like to introduce Nick Seeberger to speak further about this project.
Thanks very much. So I'm the director of Paradisic. Paradisic's a project that you just heard about. It's been going for 21 years, which is sort of unusual for projects of that kind in Australia. But I think that also speaks to its value. We have lots of great connections with agencies in the Pacific, and Digital Pacific picks up our catalogue. So we're one of the feeders of Digital Pacific as well. And we try and get as much coverage for the metadata so that people can find material. Trove picks up our catalogue, as does Google and so on. So we really want people in the Pacific to find this material. So if you know of people in the Pacific who are looking for audio records in particular, some of these, there are maybe 200 tapes that were made by a researcher in the 1950s or 60s, and now they're available, with license conditions, of course. But yeah, so it's an exciting project. I'm happy to take questions. The whole RO Crate aspect of it, if you want to know more about that, I'm happy to talk about that offline perhaps, but it's just a great new direction and very promising. So Tabutu talked about Omeka, I think, right, as one of the delivery mechanisms, and RO Crate can feed Omeka. And so there's just all these wonderful connections that are now being sort of emerging, I suppose, for ways of getting collections back into the Pacific. So I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Nick. That's really fascinating. I wanted to ask, I'm just interested in that you said that you had found a whole lot of collections, and I was interested in what types of communities and collections and where you're finding these collections and what sort of things you are finding.
So initially we set the project up because there were a lot of tapes made by Australian researchers who'd worked in the Pacific or in Papua New Guinea or Southeast Asia, and there was no agency in Australia that had it as its role to look after these recordings. So we were very concerned. A lot of them were at the Australian National University, going back to the 60s, and we got a ARC LEAF grant, so an infrastructure funding grant, to digitize tapes and to build a catalogue, and it just kept going from there. And we get more and more of these tapes made by Australian researchers. But the interesting thing then is when we take these back to the Institute of Papua New Guinea Studies or the Solomon Islands National Museum or the Vanuatu Cultural Centre, they say, well, we have all these tapes and we can't deal with them. Often they don't have open reel players, or their cassette playback machines aren't suitable. So we've been doing a lot of work, especially with the Vanuatu Cultural Centre and the Solomon Islands National Museum, bringing their tapes back, cleaning them, digitising them, and then returning them to them. But, you know, we can only do that a bit at a time. We don't have much funding. We get grants of various kinds. So you saw with the YAP collection that we got some money from UNESCO. Otherwise, we've had funding from the Endangered Archives program or the Endangered Language Development Program, legacy material grants. Yes, there are all kinds of small grants. These are, you know, maximum maybe $10,000, $15,000. And it's very expensive to clean, you know, to clean the tapes, and it can take a few days to get a tape ready. We've also been working with a whiz kid here who's developed a cassette lubricating machine. So a lot of old cassettes are dry and they won't play, and they screech when you put them into the playback machine. So we're now able to play those cassettes and digitize them. So, you know, we have the expertise, and we're really keen to do more of this with agencies all over the place. We recently got some Tongan tapes. Again, people hear about the project and then they just approach us and see if we can help them with these collections of tapes.
That's fantastic. That's really interesting. And you see this as being an ongoing service, because obviously there's going to be endless need for this sort of digitisation.
Well, not according to the National Film and Sound Archive. It's all going to finish next year. Right? They had deadline 2025. Of course, that was perhaps it'll extend to 2030 now. But yes, we do see this as an ongoing project. We've got the University of Sydney is committed to hosting Paradisec in the long term. It is a project between the ANU, Melbourne and Sydney at the moment. And we do keep getting tapes. So it is definitely something, you know, that there's a real need for, and there's nobody else really doing this.
Right. Nicholas has a question. Yeah.
Hi, Nick. Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, are you working out of the Pacific somewhere?
Out of the Pacific?
Are you working in the Pacific? Like,
no,
is your office, are you back in the Pacific?
No, I'm in Melbourne, and the
main
office is in Sydney.
Cool. And I was just wondering as well, it seems like you're all sharing technology and research throughout the Pacific, and is the relationship good between all the different countries? Is everyone helping each other and everyone trying to share what they've learned and trying to progress further?
There's not a lot in the way of resources in the Pacific. So yes, people do share, and there's Publica, which is a great way of people getting together and sharing information in the Pacific. But, you know, they're very small countries. They're not particularly wealthy countries, and they don't have a lot of resources to, you know, go around and visit other countries. So I'm sure there's a lot of goodwill and intention that should happen. But, you know, in my experience, I worked at the Vanuatu Cultural Centre for 3 years, so I have some experience there. And really, you know, when you've got cyclones and you've got power shortage, you know, power outages and earthquakes, and, you know, there's so much that's playing against agencies in the Pacific. They really do need as much support as we can give them.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? We've got a few minutes if anyone else would like to ask Nick a question.
If not, I mean, I could just show you 2 ways we've created for visualizing material in the collection. Is that all right?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. So this is Soundscape, and what we've done here is, because audio collections are very difficult to visualize because all you've got is metadata, we took snippets of recordings, and if you can hear that.
Yes.
So this is online.
Meeting.
And there's music. So what you can see is we've taken these 20-second snippets just to give you a sense of what's in the collection, and you can see the geographic spread there. So this is one way we've done it. The other way was to create a virtual reality flyover. So this is flying over Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu. And as you fly over this country, you'll see that each of these shards that's leaping out of the ground is a language. And as you get close to it, if there are examples in the collection, then you can hear this sort of forest of languages as you travel through it. So here we are in Papua New Guinea. So if you can hear this, and as you click on them through, you'll see that particular examples that you can hear. So again, we're trying to explore ways of visualizing a large collection of audio material. There we go. So yeah, they're 2, they're both, sorry. They're both online. Was I sharing them? Yeah.
Yeah, that was great.
Online. I can send the URLs to people if they're interested in watching them.
Thank you, Nick. I think we had a couple of questions from Jenny Wee.
Hi, Jenny.
Yeah. Hi, Nick. I'm at IATSIS, as you can probably see. Can you just explain more, Nick, about the transcriptions that you've got there? What's the technology behind your transcriptions aligning with the audio?
So we allow for transcriptions in Elan, which is a common tool that linguists and musicologists are using for doing transcriptions. And our system understands Elan. So when you put an Elan transcript and a media file together into the system, it knows how to play them together. And we've got actually, you know, a few thousand transcripts of various kinds. What we also do is we get interns or other interested people to do summaries of files. So they may not be transcripts, but they may summarize a file and say, this is 10 minutes of a man talking, this is 5 minutes of music, or whatever, just to give a bit more of a point of entry to the material. So yeah, Elan is a great format. We train a lot of speakers in transcribing using Elan, and that gives you a great point of entry to media files.
Thank you, Nick. I think Ben Chesterman also had a question. Oh, Ben, you're muted. Sorry, no, that's okay now.
I'm
Oh.
sorry, I can't. Sorry, Ben, I can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Ben. Looks like your sound isn't working. Maybe you could type your question into the chat and we'll come back to it in a moment.
Yeah, it was just dropping in and out.
In the meantime, I was going to ask Nick if he could share the URLs from those demos, because that was really interesting to see, and it would be nice to have a play with that. So that would be great to share with the audience. Thanks, Nick.
Put them into the chat, thanks.
I think Nick shared those in the chat, which is great. We'll just give Ben a minute to see if we can type in his question. Nick, I'm interested, because you said you're making sure people get licenses to reuse the material. If you've got this old recordings, often if made potentially in Indigenous communities, how are you sourcing licenses for the use of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, obviously that's a big issue. And for material, say, recorded in the past, we get the person who created the material to sign a deposit form which specifies the conditions. That's as much as we can do. We've got material from 1,360 languages. It's impossible for us to go and, ask each of those communities for their opinions. But we also use a takedown principle so that if anybody finds material in the collection that needs to be redacted in some way, they can get in touch and we'll take it down. But as Taputu said too, we've been going for 21 years and we've never had a single request, and we've always had the opposite. We've had people who are really, amazed to find recordings, sometimes of their, grandparents that they didn't know existed. So, yeah, I think it's a fraud issue, and I know that there's a lot of discussion around licensing, but we do the best we can. And the other interesting thing, of course, with digital technology is we can put up collections that are only accessible to certain people while they're being built. We can we can designate a certain user or ask somebody in Vanuatu to work on a collection that's not available to anybody else, and then they can decide which items in that collection should or shouldn't be made available or redacted. So, the technology allows you to work with materials. And also we've had examples of materials in Aboriginal Australia where somebody's died. We've been told about that and they've asked us to take that material offline while the mourning period is observed, and then afterwards they say that it's fine to go back up again. So we can do that. We're very, having an online platform like this allows you to be quite flexible in the way that you do this work.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really interesting. I think Ben's question has come through on the chat, if you can see that, Nick.
Yes. Yes, the lubricating machine. So I know IATSIS has recently built a couple of these machines as well, and Sam King, who's building our machines here in Melbourne, was involved in building the one at IATSIS with Doug, some other people there. And I think IATSIS has made the designs available, but I'm happy to talk to you more offline if you want to talk, and put you in touch with Sam.
And that knowledge sharing session sounds great. Zazra. Okay, thanks, Ben. So anyone else have any questions that they'd like, or any other comments that they'd like to talk to Nick about? Well, I think we'll keep moving, so we end up with some time at the end. So, okay, thank you very much, Nick. That was wonderful.